Hello and welcome to the Executive Pill, the podcast where brilliant leaders from every corner of the world share their secrets to help you lead smarter, influence better, and succeed faster. Think of it as your cheat code to navigating leadership with clarity and confidence. I'm your host, Alex D. Tremble, and I am the CEO of GPS Leadership Solutions. And over the past decade, I've had the privilege of helping executives at Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and many amazing smaller and mid-sized organizations navigate leadership, influence, and culture. This podcast is where you have your shortcut to learning what works best from the best. And I promise you this, what you're about to hear today is not theory. It's proven strategies you can use today. And before we jump in, here's a tiny request with a massive ripple effect. Please, please, please do hit that like button. Why? Because in our attention economy, your click is the fuel that powers these life-changing ideas to reach more and more people every single day. You're not just clicking a button, you're literally leading a movement. Now let's make today extraordinary together. Today we have with us the amazing Mr. Timothy J. Hansen. See, Tim is the owner and principal of Blue Ridge Valuation Services, a certified general appraiser in Colorado and West Virginia, and an accredited member of the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers and National Association of Appraisers. Tim recently retired from the federal government's senior executive service, where he served as the director of the Appraisal and Valuation Services Office, AVSO, within the U.S. Department of the Interior's Office of the Secretary. And in that role, Tim oversaw valuation services for 5 Department of the Interior bureaus that collectively manage 500 million acres of surface estate. How are you doing today, kind sir?
I'm doing well, Alex. Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. I'm going to ask you a softball question just to get everyone on the same playing field as to how amazing you are. What do we need to know about your past to understand how you see the world?
I think a couple things. There's both the technical aspect and then also the sort of the leadership aspect. From the technical aspect, as an appraiser, an accredited appraiser, I came into the profession a little bit different than most. My background was not in finance or marketing or even real estate. It was in wildlife management. And so I tend to look at everything sometimes through a scientific lens versus a business lens. And that has worked well at times and not so well at times in my career. But it's always been something that gave me a little bit different perspective than many appraisers that I worked with, just coming at it from a different angle and maybe more of a scientific angle. From a leadership perspective, I think, and I know there's a lot of debate about whether leaders are created or they just happen. And I think the answer is both. But in my case, I'm not sure why, but I've always sort of gravitated to or been asked to be in a leadership role. It's not that I sought them out, not that I really pursued them. It was more that a need arose. I stepped up and moved into that role and then just continued to move on from there. So I think that's important to know, is that it's not one of those things that I was striving to be the leader of everything related to appraisal at the Department of Interior. It just sort of happened over my career that I moved into more and more responsible positions and did a good job and eventually became that in that leadership role within the senior executive service.
Well, there's 2 directions I want to go now. So let's see if we can hit both of them. First is valuation appraisals. We talked about this in the federal government context. Is this, I know the answer, but I'm going to make sure the audience knows it. Is this applicable? Is what you do applicable to non-government agencies? Do private sector organizations worry about this? Do they do anything with it? And if so, what is the impact? Why is this important to them?
Yeah, I think every organization, evaluation organization, deals with some of these same issues. You know, we used to joke a lot that as appraisers, the only time we knew we were, getting the right number was if both sides were unhappy. And you're always looking at it, whether it's a government position or a non-government position. If you have a client on one hand that's engaging you for the assignment that wants a certain outcome, you may have a reviewer on another side. It could be a lender reviewer, it could be a government reviewer, it could be anybody that's taking another look at the appraisal and may have their own objectives. And so you're constantly in this battle about, yeah, my client engaged me for this assignment. I want to make sure that I give them good customer service and provide them what they've asked for. But at the same time, I'm also bound to follow the ethics and standards that all appraisers are, regardless of who they work for, that are in the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, which pretty much guides everything that appraisers do as far as appraisal work. And so you have these ethical, boundaries that you struggle with sometimes. And this was very true in the government work. And we can get into that later, but I think every appraiser has those challenges to meet, whether they're in the private sector or government, as far as ethics and pleasing their client and turn times and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely applicable all across the appraisal spectrum.
Well, I think everyone would love to hear some examples, like you said, in the federal government. My question is, I want to dive into this a bit more because this is, again, something that's relevant to all, I believe, all leaders, especially at the more executive levels. How do you do your job well, ethically, and having standards while also having to navigate organizational politics? Because the reality is that it'd be super easy if you just had a calculation to throw some numbers in and there's the answer. That would make it so anyone could do it. Anyone could just plug in numbers. And so my understanding is that this job is more difficult than literally just throwing a number in a spreadsheet. So how did you actually navigate those instances where you have those ethical standards that you have to navigate, but you also have the politics of not only the organization, but the stakeholders outside the organization, people lobbying, people trying to influence the process and the outcome.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions we could go with that one. I'll just give you a quick example that happened to a friend of mine many years ago. And you if you're in the residential appraisal community and you're doing, say, an appraisal for a refinance, you pull up in the driveway and the homeowner's there waiting so you can do the inspection. And as you're walking through the property, looking at the property, the homeowner says, I really need this appraisal to hit this certain number or I'm going to lose my house. I need this amount of value to, pay off my car loan or whatever. I mean, it could be a myriad of things. And we're all human, and you're like, wow, that's a serious situation. I feel for you, but from an ethical standpoint, you are, as an appraiser, your main role is to be an unbiased, to give an unbiased opinion of value for the property based on, the research and analysis that you've done. And you really can't take that into account, the need of the client. In this case, in a lending appraisal, they're not your client. They're not even an intended user many times of the appraisal report, but they're there. They're the human person that's talking to you saying, I really need this. This is critical to me. And the repercussions if this value doesn't hit the mark are huge to me personally. And so I think, what those kind of situations are real. I'm sure if you talk to a bunch of appraisers, everyone has some sort of a story like that. There's other situations in government work where, I can think of a couple instances where we had properties that had a one-of-a-kind unique feature. Like I'll just throw out Pompey's Pillar in Montana, which if you're not familiar with that, Lewis and Clark etched their names into the rock when they passed through back in the 1800s. And there's only one of those in the world, and the government wanted to acquire it to protect it. And yet we're bound by certain ethics and standards that we have to look at the market value of the property and disregard the potential, value of that signature being in that place at that time. And there's several of those that I can think of over my career where the value came in much lower because we had to look at it through the lens of market value, not the lens of how much is this worth because it's this special thing. And those are ethical dilemmas that you face all the time. And to take it even one step bigger, you may be, this is my sixth administration that I've been involved in. And every administration has a different personality, different goals and objectives, as you can imagine. And it does vary somewhat by whichever party's in control at the time, but they're generally, they have their marching orders. And sometimes through a lack of maybe understanding of the appraisal process or the requirements of the standards, you may be placed in a situation where you're being asked to do things that as an appraiser are unethical, but they would help whichever administration meet their goals. And so, it's all the way through, you have these different ethical challenges as a leader, as an appraiser. And I think the key thing to help you navigate that is that you have a clear understanding of your own core values and your own direction and your own boundaries that can't be crossed. And so that, I can't emphasize that enough, that you have to know yourself, whether as an appraiser or as a leader in government or any other agency, that you need to know those things to be an effective leader, where you stand, what your values are, and how that all fits into the whole puzzle.
Jim, I couldn't agree with you more on, especially on that last piece, which is when I have worked with leaders who found themselves in hot water because of making bad decisions, bad ethical decisions. It wasn't because, and this is even if y'all don't got to think about me, like just look at people in the past, leaders who found themselves in a poor place because of some bad ethical decisions. It wasn't because one day they were like, "Oh, I'm this a wonderful, really ethical guy," and the next day they're like, "Yes, I can't wait to undermine everyone. I'm going to be unethical." Like it always came as little steps. Oh, I guess it's okay to do this. And you take a little step. Well, this is not that bad, I guess. And taking a little step, and you ultimately make your way down where you're justifying something that is a way leaps and bounds from where you used to be, because you've made those little steps over time. And I've always found the easiest way to make sure you keep yourself out of that hot water is, as Tim just said, identify your core values, and those behaviors that are in alignment with those values in the front end. So every time you're placed in a situation where you got to make a decision, you can literally just look at this piece of paper and say, no, this is not in line with my values. Or you can at least say, you know what, this is not aligned with my values. I'm willing to make this adjustment or make this exception for this reason. So at least you're doing it intentionally, not slowly, unintentionally walking down the pipeline. So I couldn't agree with you more. And the other piece of that is like, this is why with every leader I work with, I always ask them about their finances, which is, they're like, "Oh, why are you're an executive coach, you're coaching people in their leadership. Why do you care about the finances?" Well, you know what? When people have a good nest egg set aside, or a backup fund or emergency fund set aside, they're actually less likely to make a dumb decision. Because they're like, "Hey, if someone tries to fire me or bully me in something, I will be okay. I'll go somewhere else." But when you have your back against the wall, you're more likely to do something crazy because you think that's the only way out. And so I love to just maybe take one more step down this conversation, if I can, Tim, which is if you find and this is going to be you, or not even someone you've seen before, but when you find yourself in a situation where you are being pressured by someone who's more senior to you to make a decision that's not in alignment with the ethics or the values, how do you, obviously you can quit. Let's say you don't want to quit. How do you navigate that conversation, that relationship, to hopefully allow them to see where you're trying to get them in the best way?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, well, I should say what I always try to do, and I guess that's all I can speak for is myself, but, you know, I always looked at it from the objective of, or from the angle of what is it that's driving their need for this particular thing they want me to do that I may not agree with, or maybe feel ethically that I can't do. What's the motivation behind them? One of my favorite authors, Stephen J. Dubner, in Freakonomics, he talks a lot about incentives. And if you can identify the incentives, a lot of times you can find the reason for a certain activity or lack of activity. And so I often try and identify that. But sometimes it's just a matter of not understanding the situation, or not understanding the obligations that, say, we'll just use appraisal because that's where I'm at. And, an appraiser has to other entities outside of whoever's wanting them to do the certain activity. So as an example, and for those that aren't aware, appraisal licenses are issued by each state. There is no federal appraisal license. And so each state has its own regulatory board, and they are fairly uniform, but there are differences with each state. So you have to answer to that state board wherever you hold your license. And a lot of times, people that aren't appraisers don't understand that. They think, oh, well, you can just bend the rules and nothing will happen. Well, I'm here to tell you that things happen. If somebody doesn't like what you've done, they will turn you into the state board, who will do an investigation, and they may yank your license and you may lose your livelihood. And so people think appraisers are sticks in the mud. They won't, bend the rules. And there's reasons why they won't bend the rules, because there's that actual threat of losing the license, which allows you to do what you do. And so, and I will say this, as a federal appraiser, when I worked with the Forest Service many, many years ago, even doing a federal government job, I was turned into the state of Colorado by someone who didn't like the proposed land exchange that was going on. And so they tried all different sorts of ways to derail it, but they couldn't get anywhere with that. And so they filed a complaint against me because I wrote the appraisal instructions for how the appraisal was to be done, and they didn't feel like I addressed their concerns. And so they filed a complaint against me, and I had to defend myself at the state, and take my work file down there and have an interview, and all those things. And ultimately they ended up ruling that there was no basis for the complaint. But it took a while. It took some effort. It took some work on my part to make sure that everything. And then you start questioning yourself. It's like, okay, well, did I do everything that I needed to do? And so, oftentimes I think I've been called hidebound. I've been called, obstinate. I've been called all sorts of names because I wouldn't bend those values because I knew what the threat was. And so then it becomes an issue of education to whoever's placing those pressures on you, and say, hey, look, here's what can happen. And these are the potential outcomes if we go this way, and try and keep it objective and level-headed, non-emotional, lay out the facts. This is the potential ways we can go. And most leaders are open to hearing, okay, well, this presents another risk that I hadn't thought about. If the appraisal blows up, now I'm in the hot seat. And so now that creates another risk for me. So we probably should just follow the rules. That's the hopeful outcome, I guess. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the political motivations are more than what reason will address. And so, in those situations, you do the best you can and it
Mhm.
doesn't always work the way you want it to work. But at the end of the day, you, especially like as a senior executive service member, which I know you're familiar with, your job is to help whatever administration's in power to move their objectives forward. You may not personally agree with it or like it, but your role is to move those objectives forward. And so that's where it gets to that point of like, okay, do you go ahead and do this, or do you say, you know what, I'm out? And most of the time, if you're going to stay in that job for very long, you're going to be in that situation where you're confronted with something that says you either have to, move this forward in the way that is best for your organization and can do the most to protect ethics, or you have to step back and say, look, I can't do that. Um, then the following question is always, well, why can't you do that? And so that brings another opportunity for education, but it also oftentimes is used, against, I don't just speak about appraisers, but it's used against appraisers because again, it's like, oh, well, you guys are so rigid. You can't help. You're not part of the team. All those sorts of criticisms opens the door. But at the end of the day, you're the one that has to answer for whatever those decisions are that you make. And you're the one that has to take your work file down to the state regulatory board. And there isn't going to be a solicitor with you. There isn't going to be, you
Mhm.
know, unless you have errors and omissions insurance and an attorney assigned to you, most of the time it's going to be you defending your actions to somebody that may not understand why you did what you did, and that your actions were the basis of somebody that does not understand what your job is. So it's really a difficult sort of situation to be in. And that's where you have to fall back on those core values. You have to know where your limits are before this happens, so that when it does happen, then you're in a situation where you can make the best call for yourself.
I I I love everything you shared, and one of the things I think you hinted at was being sure to communicate, understand what they're trying to accomplish, right? Because a lot of people sometimes, I was working with a CEO one time, and this CEO said something crazy, and they wanted the organization to do something crazy, and I was like, hey, you don't want to do this. This is not going to set you up well legally. Da, da, da. And I finally just like, so what's the outcome you're looking for? What are you trying to achieve? Okay, great. Here's another way to get there, right?
Mhm.
And so, like you said, taking the time to understand what do they actually want, and then, like again, you said at the end, it's not about it's not always about saying no. It's this is what I can do. Like because there's a huge difference in the psychological piece of just saying, hey, no, I won't do that versus, hey, this is what I can do to achieve your goals. I wanted to ask you, Tim, because again, I was blessed to work with to be able to serve you and your executive team for worked there almost 2 years. Um, I what is what is a hard truth you had to learn that made you a better executive leader? And I'm saying that, I'm a preface so everyone, while you're thinking about that, I had the opportunity to work with his team and his staff, and they really, really loved working with you and trusted you. And so it's like you created an amazing atmosphere somehow. So as you're thinking about it, what is that hard thing you learned about, the hard truth you had to learn that made you a better executive leader?
Do I get two?
Please.
So the first one, I think, is sort of an easy one, I guess, looking back, having some reflection. I moved into the SES and the director role. I'd previously been chief appraiser. So I moved in as a known commodity, and also from a very technical role to a more of a leadership role. And that's definitely a challenge. You have when you are promoted from within an organization, oftentimes everybody knows you as one thing, and then all of a sudden you're something else. And so you have to learn that for a while anyway, people will always look at you as what your previous role was, and it takes a
Mm,
while to grow into the new role. And the related issue of that is well, so I guess that's my preamble into what I was going to address here. You have to consciously make an effort to step out of the old role. And that can be very, very challenging, especially like, this is my example as chief appraiser. I was the problem solver. I was the valuation expert for the department. If there was a valuation question that came up, it came to me. And I had developed good working relationships with the solicitor's office, the office of inspector general, all of our clients, that when a question came up, hey, we'll call Tim, we'll find out. Well, those relationships don't end when you take a new job. They're still there, and you may still get those calls. Hey, I need this answer to this question. And you may know the answer and can give it to them immediately. But one of the hardest things for me to do was not to jump in and give that answer. It was say, no, you need to talk to this person on our leadership team. They'll help you do that. Because if I did jump in and I gave them the answer, that did two things. One, it perpetuated the idea that, hey, we can just call Tim and get the answer. But two, it undermined that other employee's ability to grow into their position and to lead. And so that was something that took me a couple of years to jump in, or to figure out not to jump in immediately, even if I knew the answer. And that's very hard when it's right there and you can solve the problem. You got 20 things that you need to solve. This is one of them, and I can knock this out in 30 seconds. But it takes a lot of discipline to eventually say, you know what, you need to call this person, and they can help you with that. That helps you, that helps them, that helps the client or whoever's asking the question. So that's a lesson learned that I think is very important. Along those lines, the second thing I was going to mention was, no matter how much you think you are communicating, you're not communicating enough. There's never too much communication. Even if you think you're inundating people with things, they still want more. And that's just human nature. I mean, nature abhors a vacuum. A human being abhors a vacuum in communication. They'll make up their own stories to fit whatever the situation is, and rather than wait for another something to pop up. So that was a criticism I received a lot, was I didn't communicate enough. And in my mind, I was communicating, I thought on a very regular basis, and I was trying to make sure that everybody understood what was going on. But the reality was, a lot of people felt like they were just out there in the dark on an island. And it became even more prevalent during COVID and after COVID with remote work, where we weren't in an office situation. It became harder and harder to communicate enough so that people felt connected to the organization, connected to you as a leader. That's the other lesson I guess learned, is like, whatever level you're communicating at, you need to kick it up a notch and do even more.
Good look, Tim. Those are really, really great lessons, really great gold nuggets. I know we're about to wrap up, but I want to open the floor back to you, Tim. Is there anything you want to share with the audience as we begin to wrap up and you begin to go do something really amazing, because you're always doing some amazing stuff?
No, I mean, I guess one of the things I would say, just in general, for somebody that's, either in a leadership role or looking to move into a leadership role, is, don't turn down opportunities for growth. That's one of the things that I always, I think, helped me get to where I ended up. And, something comes along and, they say, would you like to do this? Would you like to take this on? I need some help in this area. Take the opportunity. If you don't, nothing risked, nothing gained, I guess, is a way to look at it. But those sorts of kind of one-off opportunities throughout my career ended up becoming the hallmarks of my career, is that I was able to be involved in some very special projects that ultimately, kind of created the opportunity for me to move up and move on and those sorts of things. So don't say no to opportunities when they present themselves. I'll give you just a real quick example if I could. When I was a new appraiser at the Bureau of Land Management, this was back in the early 2000s, I was given the opportunity for two special projects. One was I could teach a course on right-of-way appraisal to the Colorado, the Realty Specialist in Region 2 of the Forest Service, or I could be the contracting officer's representative for a contract with the Appraisal Foundation to review the appraisal function of the Bureau of Land Management. There'd been a lot of audits in the late 90s and early 2000s that were very critical of the appraisal function when it resided in the bureaus. And so I thought, well, I'm pretty new. I'll take on the contracting piece, the contracting officer's representative piece, because I think that would give me a really broad opportunity to kind of see everything and talk to a lot of different people. And so I did. And long story short, this ended up being the kind of critical point in appraisal function within the Bureau or within the Department of Interior, honestly, where it came back. It was critical. I was pressured to not approve it as the core, not recommend approval by the contracting officer's representative. Again, I fell back on my core values and I was like, no, there's some valid stuff in here and this needs to be addressed. I approved it. It wasn't much later than that the Secretary of the Interior, Gail Norton at the time, signed a secretarial order and removed all the appraisers from the bureaus and consolidated them into a separate office to protect against pressure from different parties in the appraisal process and to create an independent appraisal process. And so that ended up leading to many, many opportunities, changes. One was that I decided that I was going to do something different and went to the Department of Agriculture for 6 years, but to get out from under that cloud. But really, I mean, honestly, and I think and some people know on the call that serving on the Appraisal Foundation Advisory Council representing the Department of the Interior there. That created that natural progression. And then, I currently serve as the vice chair of the Appraisal Standards Board of the Appraisal Foundation. And that's been something that, over many years, that opportunity 25 years ago now, gave me an exposure to things that I would not have been exposed to before, just because I didn't say no. And by the way, I ended up having to teach the right-of-way class as well. So it's really a Hobson's choice, I guess. When you look back at it, it wasn't one or the other, it was both. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I would just say, if you're thinking about becoming a leader or moving into an executive role, don't be afraid to take on challenges, even if you don't think you're immediately qualified for it or that you can do it. You can do it. You will figure out a way, and you'll be successful.
Hey, thank you so much, Tim. Look, before I start wrapping this up, please do us a favor, click the like. We really appreciate the love here because, again, it pushes the message out to more and more people. So thank you so much. If you found value, if you're at this point, you found value because you kept listening. So go on and click the like. Make sure you share it with one other person. I just wanted to add on to that. One of the things, and maybe this is not good, we'll see. But one of the things that's guided me in my life, in my career, has always been choosing the difficult thing. There's easy routes and there's hard routes. Now, it's not hard for no reason, but it's just like, is this going to be the easy thing that, okay, I'll get through it? Or is this going to be the hard thing that I'm going to actually learn? It's going to make me learn something. And every time I went for the hard thing, I grew so much faster. I met so many more people. I had stories like you. I had stories I could share with other people. Say, hey, look, this is what happens. The skills. This is how we accomplish this. And those difficult moments, those difficult choices are the ones that really set you up and callous you, because leadership's not easy, and you need to be able to take some bumps and bruises at times. And so I encourage, again, if you're looking to become an executive or you're already an executive and you're looking for that next senior level executive position, what's difficult? And if life is easy right now, if what you're doing is easy right now, then it's probably time to try something new. So again, thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate you spending your time listening to us, listening to Tim's story, letting me kind of share my little story for once in a while. You know, as I'm always going to leave out here, I encourage you to stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving. See ya. Thanks for listening to The Executive Appeal with Alex Tremble. I invite you to follow The Executive Appeal wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow me, your host, Alex Tremble, across all socials or via email for exclusive webinars, courses, and in speaking engagements on continued topics of executive leadership. So until next time, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving.